In the weeks that followed, the Desert Thunder Motorcycle Club became an extended family for both Sarah and Tommy. Bear kept his promise to watch over them, but his protection went far beyond just keeping Marcus away. The club members used their connections throughout the city to help Tommy navigate the VA system and get the benefits he deserved. Maria Steele Gonzalez, with her medical background, helped coordinate Tommy's health care and worked with Sarah to develop a treatment plan for his physical and mental health needs. Her experience as a combat medic proved invaluable in understanding Tommy's injuries and helping him cope. With his PTSD, Big Jim Patterson used his connections at the local labor union to help Tommy find part-time work that accommodated his disability. The job wasn't glamorous, cleaning and maintenance at a warehouse, but it gave Tommy a sense of purpose and dignity that he hadn't felt in years. Within 2 months, Tommy had received his VA disability payments and was able to rent a small studio apartment just 3 blocks from Sarah's building. It wasn't luxurious, but it was his own space, and for the first time in years he had a permanent address and a key to his own front door. Sarah's apartment was completely repaired and renovated, thanks not only to the money the motorcycle club had collected, but also to the volunteer labor provided by several members who had construction and maintenance skills. Carlos Hammer Santos, who worked as an electrician, rewired her entire kitchen. 2 other club members who were carpenters built her new cabinets and repaired the damage to her walls and floors. The transformation of the apartment building was remarkable. Word had spread quickly through the neighborhood about how the Hells Angels had stood up for a veteran and the nurse who helped him. Other drug dealers and criminals in the area decided to find new territory, not wanting to risk drawing the attention of the motorcycle club. Mrs. Peterson, the elderly neighbor who had called 911 during the confrontation, became one of Tommy's biggest supporters. She had been afraid to leave her apartment for months due to Marcus's presence in the building, but now she felt safe again. She often invited Tommy for dinner and helped him practice reading, as his education had been interrupted by his military service and years on the streets. The story of Sarah, Tommy, and the motorcycle club spread throughout the city's veteran community. The Desert Thunder chapter began receiving calls from other veterans who needed help, and they developed an informal network to provide support, job placement assistance, and protection when necessary. Dr. Helen Rodriguez, who had originally connected Bear to Sarah's situation, worked with the hospital administration to create a program for helping homeless veterans access medical care. Sarah became the coordinator of the program, using her nursing skills and her newfound connections with the veteran community to make a real difference. Tommy's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. With stable housing, regular medical care, and a support network that understood his struggles, he began to heal both physically and emotionally. He enrolled in classes at the community college, working toward a degree in social work so he could help other veterans who found themselves in situations like his. 6 months after the confrontation with Marcus, Tommy achieved a milestone that once seemed impossible. He was reunited with his children. His ex-wife, seeing how he had turned his life around, agreed to let him see his daughter and son again. The first meeting was awkward and emotional, but it was a beginning. Bear Morrison became like a father figure to Tommy, teaching him motorcycle maintenance in his garage and involving him in the club's charity work. The Hells Angels chapter had always supported veteran causes, but Tommy's situation had energized their efforts and given them a personal connection to the issues they were fighting. Sarah's life had also changed dramatically. She had always been compassionate, but her experience with Tommy and the motorcycle club had opened her eyes to the struggles facing veterans in her community. She left her hospital job to work full-time as a veterans advocate, using her medical knowledge and her growing network of connections to help former service members navigate the complex systems designed to help them. The friendship between Sarah and Tommy remained strong, but it had evolved into something more like a family relationship. Tommy considered Sarah to be the sister he never had, and she felt proud to watch him rebuild his life with such determination and courage. Marcus Webb, meanwhile, had relocated his drug operation to another part of the city, but his business never recovered from the disruption. Several of his former associates had quit after the confrontation with the motorcycle club, and word of his cowardice had spread through the criminal community. Within a year, he was arrested on drug charges and sentenced to 5 years in prison. The story of how 35 Hells Angels saved a veteran and nearly cost a nurse her life became legendary in Phoenix. It was told and retold in VFW halls, motorcycle rallies, and hospital break rooms. But for those who lived it, the real meaning wasn't in the drama of the confrontation. It was in the proof that ordinary people could still choose to do extraordinary things for each other. Tommy Richardson went from being a forgotten homeless veteran to becoming a powerful advocate for others in similar situations. Sarah Martinez discovered that her calling wasn't just to heal individual patients, but to heal the systems that failed the people who needed help most. And the Desert Thunder Motorcycle Club learned that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought overseas, but right in their own neighborhoods, protecting the people who can't protect themselves. The standoff in the hallway continued for several tense minutes. Marcus was trying to figure out how to save face in front of his crew, while also recognizing that he was in serious trouble. The 35 Hells Angels members stood like a wall of leather and determination, their collective presence filling the narrow space with an almost physical weight. Bear decided to make the situation crystal clear for Marcus. He pulled out his phone and showed him a series of photographs that the club had taken over the past few days. The images showed Marcus's drug deals, his meetings with suppliers, and his various illegal activities around the neighborhood. "We've been watching you, Webb," Bear said quietly. "We know where you live, where you conduct business, and who you work with. We also have friends in the police department who are very interested in cleaning up this neighborhood." Marcus's face went pale as he realized the implications. These weren't just random bikers making empty threats. They had done their homework and had the evidence to destroy his operation if they chose to use it. Detective Ray Kowalski, a police officer who was also a veteran and occasional associate of the motorcycle club, had provided some of the intelligence. While he couldn't officially endorse the club's methods, he had no problem with them putting pressure on a drug dealer who had been terrorizing innocent people. "What do you want?" Marcus asked, his earlier bravado completely gone. "It's simple," Bear replied. "You pack up your operation and move it somewhere else. You leave Tommy and Sarah alone forever. You compensate Sarah for the damage you caused to her apartment and car. And you spread the word that veterans under protection in this city are off limits to punks like you." One of Marcus's crew members, a nervous young man named Luis, spoke up. "Marcus, let's just take the deal. This is getting way too heavy for what we're making here anyway." The other members of Marcus's group nodded in agreement. They had signed up to intimidate ordinary civilians, not to face off against organized combat veterans. The smart play was obvious to everyone except Marcus, whose pride was making him consider fighting a battle he couldn't possibly win. Maria Steele Gonzalez stepped closer to Marcus, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow seemed more threatening than any shout. "You know what I did in the Army, Webb? I was a medic. I know exactly how to hurt people in ways that take a very long time to heal." That was enough for Marcus. His survival instincts finally overcame his ego, and he nodded slowly. "Fine, we'll move the operation. But I ain't paying for no damages." Big Jim Patterson smiled and pulled out an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Actually, you are." He handed the envelope to Bear, who opened it to reveal several $100s in cash. "Consider this a donation from your former customers, who were tired of your prices anyway." The money had come from the motorcycle club members themselves, who had each contributed to help Sarah repair her apartment and replace her damaged belongings. They understood that she had sacrificed her own safety and security to help a brother veteran, and they wanted to make sure she didn't suffer financially for her kindness. Bear knocked gently on Sarah's apartment door. "Sarah, it's Bear Morrison. The situation out here is resolved. You and Tommy are safe now." Sarah opened the door cautiously, still hardly believing what had happened. She saw the hallway filled with motorcycle club members, and Marcus's crew looking defeated and ready to leave. Tommy appeared beside her on his crutches, his eyes wide with amazement. "Thank you," Sarah said simply, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to repay you for this." Bear handed her the envelope of money. "You don't need to repay anything. You were protecting one of our brothers when nobody else would. That makes you family." Tommy stepped forward, struggling slightly with his crutches but determined to speak. "I served 2 tours in Afghanistan," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in years. "I came home thinking nobody cared about people like me anymore. You've shown me I was wrong." Several of the motorcycle club members were visibly moved by Tommy's words. Carlos Hammer Santos wiped his eyes. remembering his own difficult transition from military to civilian life. These veterans understood Tommy's pain because they had lived it themselves. As Marcus and his crew prepared to leave, Bear gave them one final warning. Remember, Webb, we're always watching. If Tommy or Sarah have any problems in the future, if they so much as get a dirty look from someone connected to you, we'll be back. And next time, we won't be interested in negotiations. Marcus nodded quickly and led his demoralized crew toward the stairs. As they passed the motorcycle club members, several of the bikers stepped aside just enough to let them through, a gesture that somehow managed to be both polite and intimidating at the same time. Within minutes, Marcus and his associates had left the building and driven away in their cars. The immediate threat was over, but Bear knew that the real work was just beginning. Tommy still needed help getting his life back together, and Sarah deserved support for her extraordinary compassion. Friday morning brought the confrontation that would change everything. Marcus had decided he was tired of waiting for Sarah and Tommy to leave voluntarily. He gathered his crew of 6 men and armed them with baseball bats and tire irons, planning to force the issue once and for all. What he didn't know was that Bear had been watching his every move. Sarah was getting ready for work when she heard heavy footsteps in the hallway outside her apartment. Through the peephole, she could see Marcus and his men approaching her door, their weapons clearly visible. Her blood ran cold as she realized this was the moment she had been dreading. "Tommy, they're here," she whispered urgently, backing away from the door. Tommy grabbed his crutches and moved as quickly as he could toward the bedroom where he had hidden his service weapon. His military training kicked in despite his physical limitations, and he began assessing their options for defense or escape. The apartment was on the 3rd floor with no fire escape, leaving them trapped. Marcus pounded on the door with his fist, his voice echoing through the hallway. "Open up, Sarah. Time's up for you and your cop friend. We're coming in whether you like it or not." Other residents had heard the commotion and quickly locked their own doors, too frightened to intervene. Mrs. Peterson, an elderly woman who lived across the hall, called 911, but she knew the police response time in this neighborhood was often slow. Just as Marcus was about to break down the door, the sound of motorcycle engines filled the street below. The rumble grew louder and louder, until it seemed to shake the entire building. Marcus paused, confused by the noise, and walked to the window at the end of the hallway. What he saw below made his stomach drop. 35 Harley-Davidson motorcycles were pulling up to the building, their riders dismounting with the coordinated precision of a military unit. These weren't ordinary bikers. They were members of the Desert Thunder chapter, and every one of them was a military veteran who had answered Bear's call. Bear led the group into the building, his heavy boots echoing on the stairs as the other club members followed behind him. They moved with quiet determination, their leather jackets displaying their club colors and military service patches. Many of them were large, intimidating men who had seen combat and weren't easily scared. When Bear reached the 3rd floor, he found Marcus and his crew still standing in the hallway, now looking considerably less confident than they had moments before. The drug dealer's 6 associates suddenly seemed very small compared to the 35 battle-tested veterans who had just arrived. "Gentlemen," Bear said calmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded troops in combat, "I think there's been a misunderstanding here." Marcus tried to maintain his tough demeanor, but his voice cracked slightly as he spoke. "This ain't your business, old man. We got a problem with the people in that apartment." Bear smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "See, that's where you're wrong. Tommy Richardson is a brother veteran, and Sarah Martinez is protecting him. That makes this very much our business." The hallway was now completely filled with motorcycle club members, each one standing silently behind Bear. The contrast was striking. Marcus's crew looked like street punks with their baseball bats, while Bear's people looked like professional soldiers who happened to ride motorcycles. Maria Steele Gonzalez stepped forward, her eyes fixed on Marcus. "We know all about your little drug operation, Webb. We know about the threats, the vandalism, and the intimidation. That ends today." Carlos Hammer Santos moved to block the stairway, ensuring that Marcus and his people couldn't simply run away. Big Jim Patterson positioned himself near the elevator, completing the containment. These veterans had moved with tactical precision, surrounding their targets without any unnecessary aggression. Marcus's crew began to panic, realizing they were completely outnumbered and outmatched. One of them, a young man named Kevin, dropped his tire iron and tried to back away. "Marcus, man, I didn't sign up for this. These guys are serious." Bear addressed Marcus directly, his tone remaining calm but carrying an unmistakable threat. "Here's how this is going to work. You and your boys are going to walk away from this building and never come back. You're going to leave Tommy and Sarah alone, and you're going to find a new place to conduct your business. Are we clear?" Marcus's face flushed with anger and embarrassment, but he was smart enough to realize he had no choice. Even if he had been carrying a gun, which he wasn't, he would have been facing dozens of trained combat veterans who knew how to handle weapons and violence far better than he did. "You can't just come in here and tell me what to do," Marcus protested weakly. "I got rights," Big Jim laughed, a sound that held no humor. "You got rights, all right. You got the right to walk out of here in one piece, which is more than you offered our brother and his friend." Inside the apartment, Sarah and Tommy had heard everything. They couldn't believe that complete strangers had risked themselves to help them. Tommy was particularly moved, having given up hope that anyone cared about veterans like him. Unknown to Sarah and Tommy, their story had reached someone who would change everything. Jake Bear Morrison was a 45-year-old mechanic who spent his weekends riding with the Desert Thunder Motorcycle Club, a local chapter of the Hells Angels. Bear was a Vietnam veteran himself, and when word reached him about what was happening to Tommy, he felt a familiar rage burning in his chest. The story had come to Bear through an unlikely chain of connections. Dr. Helen Rodriguez, who worked with Sarah at the hospital, was married to Tony Rodriguez, whose brother Danny was a member of Bear's motorcycle club. When Dr. Rodriguez mentioned Sarah's situation during a family dinner, Danny immediately thought of Bear and the other veterans in their club. Bear had seen too many of his brothers come home from war only to be forgotten and mistreated by the very society they had fought to protect. He had lost 3 friends to suicide in the past year alone, all veterans who couldn't find their place in civilian life. The idea that someone was threatening a nurse who was actually trying to help a veteran was more than he could tolerate. On Wednesday evening, Bear rode his Harley to a local bar called Murphy's, where several members of his club regularly gathered. The place was dimly lit and filled with the sound of classic rock and the clink of beer bottles. Bear found his usual crew at their corner table. Maria Steele Gonzalez, a former Army medic, Carlos Hammer Santos, an ex-Marine, and Big Jim Patterson, a Navy veteran who had served on 3 deployments. Bear told them about Tommy and Sarah's situation, his voice growing angrier with each detail. The other veterans listened in silence, their faces hardening as they understood what was happening. These were people who had sworn an oath to protect the innocent, and that oath didn't end when they took off the uniform. A nurse helping a homeless vet, and some punk dealer thinks he can intimidate them, Maria said, her knuckles white as she gripped her beer bottle. "Not in our city," Big Jim nodded slowly. "I know Marcus Webb. Used to work at the docks before he got into dealing. He's got a reputation for picking on people who can't fight back. Thinks he's tough because he's got a few wannabe gangsters following him around." Bear made a decision that would soon involve the entire Desert Thunder chapter. He pulled out his phone and started making calls. Within an hour, word had spread through their network of veterans and motorcycle club members. The message was simple. A veteran and his guardian angel needed protection, and it was time for the Brotherhood to step up. By Thursday morning, Bear had gathered intelligence on Marcus Webb and his operation. They learned that Marcus had been running drugs through the apartment building for months, using threats and intimidation to keep residents quiet. He had a history of violence, including an assault charge that had been dropped when the victim mysteriously decided not to testify. Bear and his team developed a plan that would send a clear message without crossing any legal lines. They weren't vigilantes, but they understood that sometimes the only language bullies understood was strength. The motorcycle club had connections throughout the city, including some police officers who were veterans themselves. That afternoon, Bear rode past Sarah's apartment building on his Harley doing reconnaissance. He saw Marcus's people positioned at various spots around the block, clearly maintaining their watch over Sarah and Tommy. What Marcus didn't know was that Bear was also watching him, learning his patterns and identifying his associates. Bear noticed that Marcus seemed to have about 6 regular guys helping him with his intimidation campaign. They looked tough enough to scare ordinary civilians, but Bear had faced real enemies in real combat zones. These street thugs didn't impress him at all. As Bear rode away from the apartment building, he made one more crucial phone call. He contacted his chapter president, Diesel Dave Williams, and explained the situation in detail. Diesel was a respected leader who had served as an Army Ranger and understood the importance of protecting their own. After hearing the full story, Diesel gave Bear the green light to involve the entire chapter if necessary. "Brother," Diesel said over the phone, "you do whatever it takes to protect that vet and the lady helping him. We've got your back and we've got theirs." Bear smiled grimly as he hung up the phone. Marcus Webb had no idea what he had started, but he was about to learn that threatening a veteran and his protector was a mistake he would never forget. The Desert Thunder chapter was preparing to ride, and when 35 Hells Angels showed up to settle a score, the balance of power was about to shift dramatically. That evening, Bear made his first contact with Sarah. He called the hospital and asked to speak with her, introducing himself as a friend of Dr. Rodriguez who had heard about her situation. Sarah was hesitant at first, unsure if she could trust this stranger, but Bear's genuine concern and his own military background helped put her at ease. The next morning, Sarah woke up to find her car tires slashed and threatening messages spray-painted on her windshield. Her hands trembled as she read the words, 24 hours written in red paint across the glass. Tommy emerged from the apartment and saw what had happened, his face darkening with a mixture of anger and guilt. "Sarah, I have to leave," Tommy said quietly, his voice heavy with emotion. "I won't let you get hurt because of me. I've survived on the streets before and I can do it again." But Sarah wouldn't hear of it. She had seen too many good people give up and disappear into the system. Tommy was making real progress with his VA benefits, and she knew that if he returned to the streets now, he might never get another chance. "We're going to figure this out together," she told him firmly. "I'm not abandoning you." Sarah decided to report Marcus to the police, but when Officers Johnson and Martinez arrived, they seemed more interested in questioning Tommy than investigating the threats. They ran his information and discovered his struggles with alcohol and homelessness, which made them view him as part of the problem rather than the victim. The officers took a brief report but made it clear they couldn't do much without concrete evidence of who was responsible for the vandalism. That afternoon, things escalated quickly. Sarah was at work when she received a frantic call from Tommy. Marcus had shown up at the apartment with 2 other men, demanding entry. They claimed they had a warrant to search for drugs, but Tommy could see through the lie. He had barricaded himself inside and called Sarah immediately. Sarah rushed home from the hospital, her heart pounding with fear. When she arrived, she found Marcus and his associates had broken down her door and were ransacking her apartment. Tommy was nowhere to be seen, and Sarah feared the worst. Marcus turned to her with a sinister smile, his clothes disheveled from the struggle. "Your cop friend got away this time," Marcus sneered, "but this is just the beginning. You've got 12 hours to get him out of here permanently, or next time it won't just be property damage." Sarah's apartment was destroyed. Her furniture was overturned, her belongings scattered everywhere, and her sense of safety completely shattered. She found Tommy hiding in the basement of the building, injured and shaken. He had managed to escape through a window but had twisted his ankle in the fall. His prosthetic leg was damaged, making it even harder for him to move. As Sarah helped Tommy back to what remained of her apartment, she realized they were in serious danger. Marcus wasn't going to stop until Tommy was gone, and possibly not even then. She tried calling the police again, but the same officers responded with the same dismissive attitude. They suggested that Sarah should reconsider her living arrangements and maybe find somewhere else for Tommy to stay. That night, Sarah barely slept. Every sound in the hallway made her jump, and she kept checking the locks on her door. Tommy sat in the corner, cleaning his old service weapon that he had kept hidden since leaving the military. He had hoped never to touch it again, but he knew they were running out of options. The next morning brought worse news. Sarah discovered that Marcus had been spreading lies about Tommy throughout the neighborhood, claiming he was a dangerous criminal who posed a threat to families. Some of the other residents began avoiding Sarah, and she even received a few hostile looks from people she had known for years. Marcus had also escalated his campaign of intimidation. He had enlisted more of his associates, and they began taking shifts watching Sarah's apartment building. Every time she left for work or returned home, she felt their eyes on her. They made no effort to hide their presence, wanting her to know she was being watched. The breaking point came when Sarah found a dead rat, nailed to her apartment door with a note that read, "This is what happens to rats and their friends." The message was clear, and Sarah knew they were rapidly running out of time. Tommy's guilt was eating him alive, and he begged Sarah to let him leave before something terrible happened to her. But Sarah had made up her mind. She wasn't going to let a bully like Marcus destroy their lives or prevent her from helping someone who truly deserved it. What she didn't know was that help was about to come from the most unexpected source imaginable. Sarah Martinez had always believed in helping others, but she never imagined that one act of kindness would nearly cost her everything. It was a cold Tuesday evening in November when she first met Tommy Richardson outside the grocery store in downtown Phoenix. The 58-year-old veteran sat hunched against the brick wall, his weathered hands clutching a cardboard sign that read, "Homeless vet, anything helps." Most people walked past Tommy without a second glance, but Sarah couldn't ignore the pain in his eyes. She had just finished her shift as a nurse at the local hospital and was picking up groceries for dinner. Something about Tommy reminded her of her own father, who had served in Vietnam and struggled with his demons long after coming home. "Excuse me, sir," Sarah said softly, approaching Tommy with a warm smile. "Have you eaten today?" Tommy looked up, surprised by the genuine concern in her voice. His face was lined with years of hardship, and his clothes were worn thin from countless nights spent outdoors. "Not since yesterday morning, ma'am," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Without hesitation, Sarah invited Tommy to join her for dinner at the diner across the street. As they sat in the corner booth, Tommy shared his story. He had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, lost his leg in an IED explosion, and returned home to find his wife had left and taken their children. The physical and emotional wounds proved too much to bear, and he eventually lost his job, his home, and his hope. Sarah listened with tears in her eyes, her heart breaking for this man who had sacrificed so much for his country, only to be forgotten by society. She learned that Tommy had been living on the streets for 3 years, moving from shelter to shelter, trying to survive each day. The VA system had failed him repeatedly, and he had given up on getting the help he desperately needed. That night, Sarah made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She couldn't let Tommy return to the cold streets. Against the advice of her friends and family, she offered him a place to stay in her small apartment. Tommy was hesitant at first, not wanting to burden this kind stranger, but Sarah insisted. For the next few weeks, Sarah worked tirelessly to help Tommy get back on his feet. She drove him to VA appointments, helped him apply for benefits, and even used her connections at the hospital to get him proper medical care for his leg. Tommy, grateful beyond words, tried to help around the apartment and began to regain some of his lost dignity. However, their peaceful arrangement was about to be shattered. Sarah had no idea that her neighbor Marcus Webb had been watching their every move. Marcus was a small-time drug dealer who had been using the apartment building as a front for his operations. He was paranoid and dangerous, with a history of violence against anyone he perceived as a threat to his business. Marcus became convinced that Tommy was an undercover cop sent to investigate him. The veteran's military bearing and the fact that Sarah had suddenly brought him into the building made Marcus suspicious. He began following them, taking pictures and asking questions around the neighborhood. His paranoia grew with each passing day, and he started making threats. One evening, as Sarah returned from work, she found Marcus waiting in the hallway outside her apartment. His eyes were bloodshot, and she could smell alcohol on his breath. "That friend of yours needs to go," he said menacingly, blocking her path to the door. "He's been asking too many questions, and I don't like cops in my building." Sarah tried to explain that Tommy was just a homeless veteran she was helping, but Marcus wouldn't listen. He grabbed her arm roughly and warned her that if Tommy didn't leave within 24 hours, there would be consequences. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she saw the cold hatred in Marcus's eyes. She knew this man was capable of violence, but she refused to abandon Tommy when he needed her most.